The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the community center's gymnasium, casting long shadows across the folding tables laden with coffee urns and faded American flags. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped low over the suburban sprawl, painting the parking lot in hues of amber and rust. It was the kind of event meant to bridge gaps, veterans' outreach, where old warriors swapped stories with families still grappling with the voids left behind. But on this day, in this room thick with the scent of stale doughnuts and unspoken grief, a single voice pierced the murmur like a crack in armor. Samuel Knox, just 10 years old, stood at the edge of the crowd, his small frame swallowed by an oversized flannel shirt that had once belonged to his father. His eyes, wide and shadowed, darted from face to face as if searching for a ghost. The boy had wandered in alone, ticket clutched in his fist like a lifeline after his grandmother dropped him off with a hurried kiss and a promise to return soon. But now, as the event wound down, the room felt too big, too empty. A group of teenagers nearby laughed too loudly, their voices echoing off the polished hardwood floor, and one of them, bored, cruel in that fleeting way kids can be, shoved past Samuel, knocking him into a chair. He stumbled, biting back a sob, his lower lip trembling as tears welled up. "Hey, kid, watch it," the teen snarled, not even looking back. Samuel sank to the floor, knees drawn to his chest, whispering to himself, "Dad, where are you?" The gymnasium's chatter faded into a distant roar in his ears, the world narrowing to the ache in his chest, the same ache that had hollowed him out since the day his father didn't come home from the deployment. No one noticed at first. The veterans milled about, their leather vests patched with unit insignias and club emblems, sharing nods and half-smiles that masked deeper scars. Then from the back of the room came the low rumble, not of thunder, but of boots on tile, deliberate and unhurried. Paul Anchor Whitfield, 58, and built like the anchors he was named for, paused mid-conversation. His face, etched with lines from desert suns and night watches, turned toward the boy. Paul's hair was silver-streaked, tied back in a ponytail that spoke of roads long traveled, and his iron promise cutter hung heavy on his broad shoulders. The club's emblem, a forged chain linking iron fists, gleaming under the lights. He'd come here not to speak, but to listen, as he always did at these gatherings, but something in Samuel's huddled form tugged at him, a pull like the old oaths that bound his crew. Paul crossed the room in measured strides, the faint creak of his leather jacket cutting through the noise. He knelt slowly, joints protesting from years of hauling freight and holding lines in the sand, until he was eye-level with the boy. The air between them carried the faint tang of motor oil clinging to Paul's skin, mixed with the warmer note of worn denim. "Hey, little brother," Paul said, his voice a gravelly anchor in the storm, steady as the hum of a well-tuned engine at dawn. Samuel looked up, startled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. The other veterans nearby began to quiet, sensing the shift, their conversations trailing off like exhaust in the wind. "You lost?" Paul asked, not pressing, just offering the words like a hand extended over a ledge. Samuel shook his head, then nodded, confusion twisting his features. "My dad. He was like you. A biker, but in the army too. He said heaven's where the brave go, but is it where bikers go? 'Cause if it is, maybe he's riding with the angels now." The question hung in the air, fragile as morning mist over a desert highway, and the room stilled completely. A few grown men, hardened riders with tattoos mapping forgotten battles, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes glistening in the harsh light. Paul's breath caught, a flicker of memory surfacing. His own losses, promises whispered in foxholes that echoed into silence. He placed a calloused hand on Samuel's shoulder, the weight of it grounding, like the solid pull of a chain linking brothers in the ride. "Heaven ain't about the roads we take, kid," Paul replied slowly, each word measured, drawing out the moment as if etching it into the ether. It's where the promises we make get kept, even when the engine quits and the dust settles. Your dad? He rode hard, kept his word to his crew, to his country, to you. That's the heaven he earned, not some cloudy garage, but a place where honor don't fade. Samuel's eyes searched Paul's face, the terror easing into something softer, a spark of understanding igniting amid the ruins. Around them, the Iron Promise crew began to gather, drawn like iron to a lodestone. Jack's Forge Harlan, Paul's road captain, with his perpetual squint from scanning horizons, stepped forward first, his massive frame blocking the exit like a sentinel. "Your old man sounds like one of us," Jax rumbled, voice thick with the emotion he rarely voiced. "We don't forget our own." Others nodded, veterans who'd traded fatigues for leathers, nurses who'd patched them up, even a firefighter from the local chapter whose scars mirrored the boy's unspoken pain. They formed a loose circle, not imposing, but enveloping. The scent of rain-dampened asphalt from their earlier ride mingling with the room's staleness. Paul helped Samuel to his feet, the boy's hand small but trusting in his. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you some coffee. Strong, like your dad probably liked it. And we'll talk about the rides that matter." As they moved toward the tables, the group followed, stories bubbling up unbidden. Tales of midnight convoys under starlit skies, of brothers pulling each other from the brink, of oaths sworn over flickering campfires that outlasted the wars. Samuel listened, the weight lifting from his shoulders, replaced by the quiet strength of men who'd chosen family in the face of fracture. Outside, the sun slipped below the horizon, casting the parking lot in twilight's embrace. Engines would roar soon, carrying the crew back to their chapters, but this moment, this intersection of loss and legacy, lingered like the echo of a throttle's growl. Samuel's question hadn't just been answered. It had reignited something deeper, a promise renewed among the riders. In the gathering dusk, as the first stars pricked the sky, Paul glanced at the boy and saw not just grief, but the faint outline of hope, a horizon yet to be ridden. If you're watching this from the quiet corners of your life, hit that like button now. It fuels these stories of the road and the heart. The gymnasium's fluorescent hum softened as the Iron Promise crew settled around a cluster of mismatched chairs, forming an impromptu circle that warded off the room's encroaching emptiness. Steam rose from styrofoam cups of black coffee, the bitter aroma cutting through the fading traces of donuts and polished wood. Samuel perched on the edge of a seat, his small hands wrapped around a mug too large for him, the warmth seeping into his palms like a tentative promise. Paul sat beside him, legs stretched out, the leather of his boots scuffed from countless miles of blacktop that stretched from forgotten battlefields to dusty back roads. The boy's eyes, still rimmed with the remnants of tears, flicked between the faces now turned toward him. Faces weathered by time and trial, each one a map of roads less traveled. Jack's Forge Harlan leaned forward first, his calloused fingers drumming a slow rhythm on his knee, the faint click of a silver ring against denim echoing like a distant Morse code. Jack's had been Paul's shadow since their days in the sand, where promises were forged in the heat of convoy runs under mortar fire. "Your dad," Jax began, his voice a low forge of gravel and resolve, "he ever tell you about the rides that don't end at the horizon?" Samuel shook his head, leaning in, the steam from his coffee curling like smoke signals. The others, Rita Mender Voss, a nurse whose hands had stitched more than wounds, and Tom Echo Riley, a firefighter with eyes that held the glow of controlled blazes, nodded in quiet agreement. Their presence a silent vow to weave the boy into their tapestry. Paul watched Samuel's face, the way curiosity edged out the shadows, and felt the old pull in his chest, the anchor's drag against a current too strong to fight alone. He'd carried his own ghost since Nam, where a brother's last words had chained him to a life of quiet guardianship. "It started in the dust," Paul said, his tone measured, painting the scene with words that conjured the acrid bite of sandstorms and the metallic tang of fear sweat under flak jackets. Me and Jax, we were hauling supplies through a valley that looked like hell's front yard. Engines roaring like thunder, but one bike, your dad's kind, heavy and true, sputtered out. Driver was pinned, leg twisted bad. Enemy closing in like wolves to a lame deer. The room's air thickened, the veteran's breaths sinking with the rhythm of the tale. Samuel's grip tightened on his mug, the liquid sloshing gently, mirroring the tension building in his small frame. Outside, the parking lot's sodium lamps flickered to life, casting elongated shadows through the windows, like fingers reaching for the light within. Rita interjected softly, her voice a balm honed from endless shifts in understaffed wards. "I wasn't there, but I've seen the scars," she said, glancing at Paul with eyes that knew the weight of unspoken recoveries. "That driver, he made it back because Anchor here didn't leave him, dragged him 2 miles on his own sled, promising the whole way that the crew waits for no one, but for each other, always." Jax chuckled, a rumble deep in his chest, but his eyes misted, betraying the humor's thin veil. "Promised him a cold one at the next oasis. Kept it too, even after the doc said he'd never walk straight again. That's the iron promise, kid. Not the patches or the pipes. It's the word you give when the world's screaming otherwise." Samuel absorbed it, his brow furrowing as pieces clicked into place. His father had spoken of such bonds in bedtime stories, tales of brothers in arms who rode through fire not for glory, but for the man beside them. But the deployment had stolen the endings, leaving only echoes in an empty house. Tom Echo leaned in, his voice carrying the faint crackle of embers from too many close calls. "My turn," he said, the words pulling the group tighter. "Last summer, warehouse fire down by the docks, flames licking the sky like they owned it. I was inside, pulling a kid from the smoke when the beam gave. Thought that was it, lungs burning, vision blurring to black. Then I hear it, the thunder of Harleys circling the block, your crew, Paul's crew, shutting down the chaos outside. They cleared the path for the trucks, held back the gawkers, even jumped in with chains to brace the walls till we got out. One rider, face black with soot, hands me a mask and says, 'Echo, we got your 6, always.'" The stories flowed like a convoy under moonlight, each one layering onto the last, building a bridge from Samuel's loss to a shared horizon. The boy listened, the oversized shirt slipping off one shoulder, revealing a faint bruise from the earlier shove, a mark of the world's casual cruelties. Paul noticed, his jaw tightening, but he let the narrative carry them forward, sensing the moral current beneath. Justice not in fists, but in the unyielding truth of loyalty. Whispers rippled through the circle, mentions of a corrupt quartermaster back in the day, skimming supplies while men starved in the field. How Paul and Jax had exposed him, not with guns, but with ledgers and oaths, redeeming a system rotten at its core. As the tales wove deeper, Samuel's grandmother arrived at last, her silhouette hesitant in the doorway, worry etching lines around her eyes. She spotted the group and froze, the scene unfolding like a vigil she'd stumbled into. Paul rose slowly, helping Samuel stand, the boy's reluctance palpable as he clutched the empty mug like a talisman. "These men, they're like Dad's stories," Samuel said to her, voice steady for the first time that evening. She nodded, tears brimming, pulling him close. The crew stood as one, a wall of quiet strength, offering nods that spoke volumes, no fanfare, just the honor of presence. Paul walked them to the door, the cool night air rushing in with the scent of impending rain and distant exhaust. Engines idled in the lot now, a low chorus waiting to carry the riders home. "Tell your dad we're riding with him," Paul murmured to Samuel, ruffling his hair with a gentleness belying his size. The boy looked up, the spark in his eyes now a steady flame. "I will. And, in thanks for the heaven talk, As grandmother and grandson stepped into the dusk, the iron promise mounted up, headlights piercing the gloom like beacons. But Paul's mind lingered on the boy's question, stirring a deeper call. A promise of his own, long buried, now resurfacing like gravel under tires. The convoy pulled out in formation, taillights fading into the suburban veins, leaving the gymnasium to its silence. Yet in that quiet seeds of redemption took root, a boy's grief transmuted into legacy, a veteran's answer echoing into the night. Farther down the road, Paul knew, challenges awaited, whispers of old debts and shadowed threats to the club's fragile peace. But for now the ride felt lighter, bound by invisible chains of unbreakable word. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments they reach you. The rain came down in sheets as the Iron Promise convoy carved through the night, headlights slicing the downpour like knives through black silk. Paul's Harley throbbed beneath him, the engine's steady pulse a counterpoint to the drumming on his helmet, water sluicing off the fairing in rivulets that blurred the taillights of the bikes ahead. Jax rode point, his broad back a familiar silhouette against the storm-lashed highway, while Rita and Tom flanked the edges, their machines humming in unison, a pack bound by more than leather and chrome. The suburban sprawl had given way to winding backroads, the kind that twisted like old regrets, leading toward the club's outpost on the city's frayed edge. Samuel's face lingered in Paul's mind, that spark of fragile hope amid the ruins, stirring echoes of a vow he'd buried deeper than desert sand. Paul downshifted as they approached the turnoff. The gravel lot of the Iron Promise garage materializing from the gloom like a half-remembered dream. Floodlights buzzed to life overhead, casting harsh pools of yellow that reflected off rain-slicked motorcycles lined up like sentinels. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and cooling metal, mingled with the faint, acrid bite of ozone from distant lightning. He killed the engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the patter on his jacket as he swung a leg over, boots sinking into the muddied ground. The crew dismounted in a ripple, shaking off water like dogs after a swim, but their faces carried the weight of the evening's revelations. No jokes tonight, just the quiet camaraderie of men who'd stared into voids and chosen to ride on. Inside the garage, the space unfolded like a cavern of redemption, walls lined with tool benches scarred from years of repairs, shelves groaning under boxes of spare parts that told stories of breakdowns and breakthroughs. A single bulb swung from the rafters, swaying gently and throwing shadows that danced across faded posters of open roads and unit crests. Paul shrugged off his scooter, hanging it on a peg beside Jax's, the club's emblem catching the light, a reminder of chains that held, not bound. Rita busied herself at the coffee pot, the percolator's gurgle filling the air as steam rose in lazy spirals, while Tom wiped down his handlebars with a rag, his movements deliberate, eyes distant. Jax broke the hush first, leaning against a workbench cluttered with wrenches and half-assembled carburetors. "That kid got under your skin, Anchor," he said, voice low, the words carrying the gravel of shared history. Paul nodded, pouring himself a mug, the hot liquid scalding his tongue as he took a sip, black, bitter like truth's best swallowed whole. "Reminds me of Mikey," Paul replied, the name slipping out unbidden. Heavy as an anchor chain dragged from the depths. Mikey, his kid brother, lost to a roadside ambush in the 90s, back when the club tangled with shadows that wore badges. A promise made in blood. Paul would shield the innocent, keep the ride clean, no matter the cost. But life had a way of piling on, deployments and drifts eroding the edges until the oath felt like a faded tattoo. The crew gathered around a scarred wooden table in the corner, chairs scraping against the concrete floor as they settled. Rita slid a plate of sandwiches across. Simple fare from the outreach leftovers, wrapped in wax paper that crinkled softly. "Talk it out," she urged, her nurse's intuition cutting through the tension like a steady hand on a fevered brow. Paul set his mug down, the steam curling toward the rafters, and let the story uncoil, words emerging slow and deliberate, painting the scene as if framing a shot from some gritty redemption flick. "It was 92, outskirts of Reno," Paul began, his gaze fixed on a crack in the table, tracing it like a fault line in memory. Mikey was barely 20, fresh patch on his back, riding scout for a charity run, delivering supplies to a res hit hard by floods. Rained like tonight, roads turning to rivers. We were strung out in convoy, engines growling against the storm, when a black and white cuts us off. Cop named Harlan, wait, no relation to you, Forge, pulled Mikey over on some bullshit pretext. Turned out the badge was rotten, shaking down riders for protection fees, funneling cash to a syndicate that preyed on the vulnerable. Mikey wouldn't bend. He called it out, promised the club we'd expose the rot. Jax's fist clenched around his mug, knuckles whitening, the faint scent of machine oil rising from his hands as he gripped tighter. The garage's air grew thicker, the rain's relentless tattoo on the tin roof underscoring the tale like a swelling score. "They ambushed him that night," Paul continued, voice steady but laced with the undercurrent of old fury. "Took him off the road, left his bike twisted in a ditch. We found the wreck at dawn, headlights piercing the mist, the chrome glinting like shattered promises. Mikey was gone, but he left a note in his saddlebag. Keep the word, Anchor. For the ride. I swore then, no more shadows. We'd clean our own house, stand for the Samuels of the world." Rita's eyes softened, her fingers tracing the edge of her sandwich wrapper, the paper's texture rough under her touch. "You did," she said quietly. "That quartermaster scandal in '05. You and Jax dug up the ledgers, turned the tide without a shot fired, redeemed the system from within." Tom nodded, his firefighters calm, an anchor in the storm of recollection. "Echoes of that here, whispers I've heard at the station, some developer eyeing our land, backed by old syndicate money, corrupt permits, pushing out the outreach spots like the one tonight. If it's tied to Harlan's ghost." The words hung, a moral crossroads illuminated by the swinging bulb's glow. Paul's mind raced. The boy's question resurfacing, heaven as kept promises. This threat, it wasn't just land, it was the soul of their chosen family, the quiet justice they upheld against a world that bent rules like cheap metal. He stood, the chair legs scraping like a decision made, and moved to the map pinned on the wall, a faded chart of local roads marked with pins for safe houses and runs. His finger traced a line toward the city core, where shadows lengthened under neon signs and boardroom deals. "We ride at first light," Paul declared, the resolve in his tone cutting through the rain's murmur like a throttle's rev. "Scout the edges, gather intel, no charges, no chaos, just truth like always." The crew murmured assent, the circle tightening. Bonds forged anew in the face of resurgence. Jax clapped Paul's shoulder, the impact solid, grounding, while Rita poured fresh rounds, the coffee's aroma weaving through the space like threads of loyalty. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, stars peeking through rifts in the clouds, distant and unyielding. Paul stepped to the open bay door, cool mist kissing his face, carrying the faint, clean scent of renewal. Samuel's spark had ignited this, a call to fulfill the buried oath, to shield the innocent from corruption's grasp. The garage lights dimmed as the crew bunked down on cots in the back, snores soon mingling with the fading patter. But Paul lay awake, staring at the rafters, the weight of tomorrow's ride settling like dew on leather. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was the miles between promises, the honor in pressing on when the road turned treacherous. In the quiet hours before dawn, the first bird call pierced the hush, a herald of the challenges ahead. Iron Promise would answer, not with thunder, but with the unbreaking chain of their word, carrying Samuel's light into the gathering shadows. Dawn broke over the Iron Promise garage like a reluctant witness, the first rays filtering through the rain-washed windows in slivers of pale gold. The air inside still carried the night's damp chill, mingled with the sharp tang of fresh-brewed coffee and the oily residue of tools laid out for the day's work. Paul stirred from his cot, muscles stiff from the hard floor, but his mind was already miles ahead, mapping routes through the city's underbelly where old shadows stirred. The crew rose with him, movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine. Jax checking tire pressures with a practiced hiss of air, Rita packing a med kit into her saddlebag, its zipper's rasp a quiet affirmation of readiness. Tom lingered by the door, gazing at the horizon where the storm clouds lingered like unspoken threats, his silhouette framed against the awakening light. They mounted up without fanfare, engines coughing to life in a staggered roar that echoed off the garage walls, vibrating through the concrete like a heartbeat quickening. Paul's Harley led the way, its chrome catching the sun's tentative glow as they pulled onto the dew-kissed blacktop. The convoy snaked through mist-shrouded suburbs, past rows of identical houses with curtains twitching in curiosity, the scent of wet grass and distant bakeries wafting on the breeze. No helmets this time, wind whipping through silver hair and fresh stubble, a deliberate choice to feel the road's raw pulse, to remind themselves why they rode. Samuel's question echoed in Paul's thoughts, a moral compass amid the turning miles. Heaven has kept promises. This scout wasn't vengeance, it was vigilance, honoring the boy's fragile spark by guarding the fragile peace. The city core loomed as they crested a hill, skyscrapers piercing the sky like jagged teeth, their glass facades reflecting the sprawl below in fractured mirrors. Jax signaled a pull-off at a nondescript diner on the edge of the industrial district, its neon sign flickering open in faded red, the parking lot pitted with cracks where weeds pushed through defiantly. They killed the engines, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant hum of traffic and the sizzle of bacon from within. Paul dismounted, boots crunching on loose gravel, and scanned the surroundings. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, warehouses squatting like forgotten giants, and beyond them, the river's sluggish flow carrying the faint rot of urban decay. Whispers from Tom's station had pointed here, permits fast-tracked for a development that would swallow outreach centers whole, backed by money trails leading to ghosts from Mikey's era. Inside the diner, the air was thick with grease and the murmur of early-shift workers hunched over plates of eggs and hash. The crew claimed a corner booth, vinyl seats creaking under their weight, the formica tables scarred from years of elbows and arguments. A waitress with tired eyes poured refills without a word, her pen scratching orders on a notepad yellowed by steam. Paul unfolded a crumpled map across the table, its edges frayed, marking pins where the syndicate's tendrils reached. A city hall contact greased with envelopes, a real estate firm posing as progress. "We start with eyes only," Paul said, voice low, tracing a finger along a dotted line toward the riverfront. "Talk to the old hands at the docks, see if Harlan's name still buys silence." Jax nodded, his squint deepening as he sipped black coffee, the mug's heat seeping through calluses. Syndicates evolved. Suits now, not badges, but the rot's the same, pushing out the vulnerable for high-rises that no one's home in. Rita leaned in, her gaze steady, unfolding a tablet with public records she'd pulled overnight, fictitious fronts like harbor renewal partners, their filings a web of shell companies. "Look here," she murmured, tapping a screen that glowed softly in the dim booth. "Outreach funding slashed last quarter, ties back to a councilman with developer ties. If we link it to the old protection rackets..." Her words trailed, the implication hanging like exhaust in still air. Exposure through truth, not confrontation, redeeming the system's fractures without shattering it further. Tom shifted, his firefighter's bulk making the booth groan. Station chatter says the same. Arson spikes near the sites, accidents to clear land fast. One warehouse went up last week. I pulled a watchman from the flames. He whispered about bribes before the smoke took him under. The man's eyes darkened, the memory etching fresh lines on his face, the diner's fluorescent buzz underscoring the ethical tightrope they walked. Paul's jaw set, the anchor within pulling taut. This wasn't just land, it was the soul of places like the gymnasium, havens for the Samuels, the lost and the grieving. Mikey's promise burned brighter now, shield the innocent, keep the ride pure. But dilemmas loomed, how far to push without crossing into the shadows they fought. They split after the meal, the crew fanning out like scouts on a horizon watch. Paul and Jax headed to the docks on foot, the midday sun climbing to bake the asphalt. Waves lapping against pilings with a rhythmic slap that carried the salt of the river. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as warnings, while the air thickened with diesel fumes and the creak of loading cranes. At a weathered bait shop, its counter cluttered with hooks and faded lures, an old-timer named Sal, leather skin from decades on the water, eyed their cooters warily. Paul slid a photo across the scarred wood, a grainy print of the developer, culled from Rita's files. "Heard this face buys quiet around here," Paul said, tone even, offering a nod instead of pressure. Sal's gaze flicked to the door, where sunlight slanted through salt-crusted windows, then back. He pocketed a crumpled bill Paul laid down, for bait, ostensibly, and leaned in, their breath smelling of pipe tobacco. Quiet's expensive these days, that one's Harlan's shadow, son maybe, carrying the old man's grudge, pushing permits that drown the little spots. Last week they leaned on the union rep, man folded like wet paper. But there's a ledger, hidden in the old Union Hall basement, dates back, shows the payoffs. The words were a crack in the facade. Justice's first whisper against corruption's roar. Paul's pulse steadied, the moral clarity cutting through the haze. Truth as the weapon, loyalty as the shield. Reuniting at the diner by late afternoon, the crew pieced it together under the booth's shelter, Rita's records matching Sal's tip, Tom's arson links forming the chain, tension coiled like a spring, the ethical suspense building. Infiltrate the hall at dusk, or call in allies from other chapters. Paul's decision anchored them, subtle, silent, honoring the promise to Samuel by protecting the fragile without becoming the storm. As they rose, the sun dipping toward the river in a blaze of orange, engines waiting like faithful hounds, a deeper resolve settled. This ride wasn't ending, it was forging ahead. Redemption in every mile, carrying the boys' light against the encroaching dark. Back on the road, the convoy reformed, wind rushing past with the promise of confrontation, not with fury, but with the unyielding integrity of men who chose family over fracture. Paul's thoughts turned to the boy, wondering if heaven's roads included such battles, where honor outlasted the grind of gears and the pull of gravity. If you're watching this from the quiet corners of your life, hit that like button now. It fuels these stories of the road and the heart. The Union Hall crouched on the river's bend like a relic from harder times, its brick facade weathered by decades of floods and forgotten strikes, windows boarded with plywood that creaked in the evening breeze. Dusk painted the scene in bruised purples and indigos, the sun's last embers reflecting off the water in fractured glints, while the distant thrum of city traffic hummed like a warning undercurrent. Paul's Harley idled at the lot's edge, concealed behind a rusted shipping container, its exhaust a faint whisper in the cooling air. The crew had split again, Rita and Tom circling the perimeter on foot, their shadows merging with the lengthening ones, while Jax flanked Paul, toolkit in hand, the metallic clink of his picks muffled against the leather satchel. No raid, no thunder, Just the quiet precision of men honoring oaths etched in loss, Samuel's innocent query fueling their resolve like high-octane truth. Paul cut the engine, the silence settling heavy as dew on chain-link fences, rattling softly in the wind. The air carried the river's briny tang, laced with the oily residue of docked barges and the faint musty rot of neglect. He dismounted, boots silent on the cracked asphalt, Kuta zipped against the chill that seeped from the water. Jax nodded once, his squint piercing the gloom, and they moved toward the side entrance, a service door scarred by boot prints and graffiti faded to ghosts. "Ledgers in the basement," Paul murmured, voice a low anchor in the tension, recalling Sal's gravelly tip from the docks. "In and out, eyes open. This ain't about glory, it's about keeping the light for kids like Samuel." Jax's hand steadied on the lock, the faint scrape of metal on metal, echoing like a held breath, as Rita's voice crackled softly over the earpiece. "Perimeter clear. Tom's got the back. Looks quiet, but shadows move funny tonight." The door yielded with a reluctant groan, swinging inward to reveal a dim corridor lit by a single emergency bulb, its red glow pulsing like a distant heartbeat. Dust motes danced in the stale air, thick with the scent of old paper and mildew, shelves lining the walls, crammed with yellowed files and union banners moth-eaten from disuse. Paul's pulse thrummed steady, each step measured, the floorboards creaking under their weight like confessions, unwilling to stay buried. Memories surfaced unbidden, Mikey's note crumpled in that saddlebag, its ink smudged by rain. "Keep the word." This infiltration was its echo, a moral stand against the syndicate's resurgence, protecting the outreach havens where boys found anchors amid grief. Jax led to the basement stairs, a narrow descent twisting into darkness, the air growing cooler, damper, as if the building itself guarded its secrets. At the bottom, the space unfolded into a labyrinth of crates and filing cabinets, shadows pooling in corners where cobwebs draped like veils. Flashlights clicked on, narrow beams cutting swaths through the murk, illuminating stacks of ledgers bound in cracked leather, dates etched in faded gold. Paul scanned the shelves, fingers trailing spines worn smooth by time, the faint must of aged ink rising to meet him. "Here," Jax whispered, pulling a volume from a low drawer. Its cover stamped Harbour Files 1995. They huddled over it on a makeshift table of overturned boxes, the pages whispering as they turned. Entries of payoffs, coded initials linking developers to badges, Harlan's name woven through like a rotten thread. Paul's breath caught at a familiar scrawl, Mikey's signature on a witness log, bold and unbroken, marking the start of the old feud. "Proof," he said softly, the word heavy with redemption's weight. "This ties the son to the father's game, bribes for land grabs, outreach centers first on the block." But the moment shattered like glass under boot. Footsteps echoed from above, heavy, deliberate, followed by the low murmur of voices filtering down the stairs. Rita's alert buzzed in their ears. "Company, 2 suits, 1 with muscle. Heading your way. Hall's compromised." Jax snapped the ledger shut, tucking it under his arm, while Paul doused the lights, plunging them into inky tension. They pressed against the wall, hearts pounding in sync with the approaching thud, the air thickening with the intruder's cologne. Sharp, synthetic, clashing with the basement's decay. A beam of light stabbed down the stairs, sweeping erratically, accompanied by a gruff voice. "Check the logs again. Boss says no loose ends before the council vote." The muscle grunted, flashlight playing over crates, inches from their hiding spot. Paul's mind raced, ethical wires crossing. Fight or fade. Violence would taint the promise, turn guardians into ghosts. Instead, he signaled Jax, silent diversion. With a subtle nudge, Jax dislodged a loose pipe from a shelf, sending it clattering across the floor in the far corner. The intruders whirled, beams converging on the noise, muttered curses filling the space as they advanced. "Rats!" one snarled, the distraction buying precious seconds. Paul and Jax slipped toward the stairs, shadows their ally, the ledger's bulk a talisman against the dark. They ascended in taut silence, emerging into the corridor just as the basement door swung wider below. Outside, the night air rushed cool and freeing, carrying the river's lap and the faint, distant wail of a siren, justice's ironic herald. Rita and Tom waited in the alley, engines idling low, the convoy reforming with urgent precision. No pursuit yet, but the air hummed with pursuit's promise. Headlights piercing the fog as they peeled away. Back at the garage, under the harsh glare of floodlights now buzzing like agitated hornets, the crew gathered around the workbench. The ledger lay open, its pages a map of corruption. Permits greased for the developers' high-rises, outreach funding rerouted to private coffers, all laced with the Harlan lineage's grudge, a vendetta born from Mikey's stand, festering into institutional rot. Rita cross-referenced it with her tablet, the screen's glow illuminating her determined frown, while Tom paced, his steps echoing the moral storm brewing. "We take this to the press. Anonymous drop," Paul proposed, voice steady as he traced the entries, the scent of rain-fresh leather mingling with the ledger's age. "Expose without exposure. Let the truth ride point, like Samuel's dad would want." Jax nodded, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The syndicate's reach was long, retaliation a shadow on the horizon. As midnight deepened, the garage's warmth wrapped around them like a chosen embrace. Coffee steaming anew in mugs scarred by countless councils. Paul's thoughts drifted to the boy, wondering if such battles etched heaven's roads, where promises outlasted the grind. This victory felt fragile, a step on the path to redemption, but the crew's unity, forged in loss, tempered by loyalty, held firm. Outside, the river flowed on, indifferent witness to the unfolding justice, while stars wheeled overhead, silent guardians of the ride ahead. The ledger closed with a soft thud, sealing their pact, for Mikey, for Samuel, for the family woven from threads of unbreakable word. But in the quiet, Paul sensed the climax building, a confrontation not of engines, but of conscience, where honor would face its truest test. The garage's floodlights dimmed to a sullen glow, as midnight bled into the small hours, casting elongated shadows across the workbench, where the ledger lay like a captured spectre. The air inside hummed with the low whir of a space heater battling the night's encroaching chill, its warmth doing little to thaw the tension coiling among the crew. Paul paced slowly, his boots echoing softly on the concrete floor, each step a measured beat against the ethical storm raging in his chest. The scent of cooling coffee mingled with the ledger's musty exhale, pages now dog-eared from frantic scans, revealing a web of deceit that stretched from dusty 90s payoffs to fresh council bribes. Jax hunched over the table, his thick fingers tracing entries under the lamp's harsh circle, while Rita typed furiously on her tablet, cross-threading the data into an anonymous dossier. Tom stood sentinel by the bay door, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the river's dark ribbon beyond, where city lights flickered like distant campfires. Paul paused, hand resting on the ledger's cover, the leather cool and unyielding under his palm. Mikey's scrawl stared back from the page, a defiant loop on a witness line, the ink faded, but the intent eternal. "This drops tomorrow," Paul said, his voice a gravel anchor in the quiet, cutting through the heater's drone. "Courier to the press, no traces back to us. Truth rides clean, exposes the rot without dragging innocence into the fire." But even as he spoke, doubt flickered like a misfiring spark. The syndicate's grudge ran deep, Harlan's shadow a vendetta that had claimed Mikey and now threatened the fragile havens where boys like Samuel found solace. Heaven's roads, the boy had asked, were they paved with such choices, where loyalty tested the soul's metal? Jax looked up, his squint sharpening, the silver ring on his finger glinting as he tapped the table. Clean's the word, Anchor. But Sal's tip came with a warning, eyes everywhere, if they catch wind before the drop. His words trailed, heavy with the unsaid. Retaliation, swift and shadowed, against the club's outposts, or worse, the outreach centers themselves. Rita paused her typing, her nurse's hands steady, but her eyes shadowed by the screen's blue pallor. I've got allies in the newsroom, old patients who owe a nod. They'll bury the source, but the fallout. It could swallow the gym, the whole network. Tom shifted, the door creaking under his weight as a gust rattled the tin roof. Stations buzzing already, arson teams on alert for accidental hits tonight. If we move at dawn, we buy time, but dawn's a long way off. The moral suspense thickened, a psychological vice squeezing the space between them. Paul felt it in his bones, the pull of old oaths clashing with the present's peril. Expose and risk the family chosen, or hold back and let corruption erode the ground beneath the vulnerable. Memories of Samuel's wide eyes resurfaced. The boy's question a beacon amid the fog, promises kept beyond the road's end. This wasn't just ledgers, it was legacy, redeeming Mikey's loss by shielding the next generation from the same void. He nodded to Jax, decision forging like iron in the forge. We split the risk. Rita, you and Tom handle the drop. Back routes, no tails. Jax and I fortify here, eyes on the river. If shadows come calling, we meet 'em with words first, wheels second. They moved with the precision of a convoy sinking gears, the garage transforming into a nerve center under the swinging bulb's watchful eye. Rita bundled the printed dossier into a waterproof envelope, sealing it with tape that rasped like a vow, while Tom checked his saddlebag for diversions, flares and a burner phone, tools of quiet defense. Jax hauled out the club's old radio scanner, its static crackle filling the air as frequencies hummed with night patrols, the faint chatter of dispatch underscoring the isolation. Paul stepped outside briefly, the cool mist kissing his face, carrying the river's briny whisper and the distant low of engines on the highway. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent sentinels, reminding him of foxhole nights where promises were whispered to the void. Samuel's father had ridden such skies, believing his sacrifice meant nothing until moments like this gave it weight, turning grief to guardianship. Back inside, the crew clasped forearms in a circle, the contact solid, grounding like chains, linking riders through storms. For the word, Paul murmured. The phrase a ritual echo from Mikey's era, binding them tighter than blood. Rita and Tom mounted first, their Harleys purring to life in the lot, tail lights fading into the fog-shrouded backroads like ghosts slipping the noose. Paul watched from the door, the night's chill seeping into his cooter until silence reclaimed the space. Jax tuned the scanner, voices crackling, routine stops, a fender bender downtown. But then, a whisper of urgency, coordinates near the Union Hall, suspicious activity reported. Paul's gut tightened, the anchor dragging against intuition's tide. They're stirring, he said, grabbing his jacket. Ride check, quiet scout. They rolled out single file, engines muffled to a rumble that blended with the river's flow. Headlights off as they hugged the shadows along the industrial fringe. The air rushed cool and damp, whipping through open vents, scented with diesel and decay. Jax led, navigating by moonlight, filtering through cloud rifts, the road's curves a metaphor for the dilemmas twisting ahead. Justice poetic, not punitive, demanding integrity amid the syndicate's grasp. At the hall's perimeter, they killed the bikes, dismounting into the underbrush where reeds whispered secrets to the wind. Flashlights stayed dark. Instead, they crept forward, silhouettes merging with the night, hearts pounding in rhythm with the lapping water. Voices drifted from the building, low, edged with frustration, accompanied by the beam of a vehicle's headlights sweeping the lot. Two figures emerged. Suits, one broad-shouldered with the bulk of hired muscle, the other slimmer, gesturing sharply at a phone. "Ledger's gone. Courier hit the basement clean. Father's ghost won't rest till we bury these biker relics." The words sliced the dark, confirmation laced with threat. The drop was known, retaliation primed. Paul's breath steadied, ethical fire igniting, Mikey's stand reborn. The boy's heaven question fueling the resolve to counter without descending to their level. He signaled Jax. Observe, record via phone's hidden mic, then fade. No confrontation here. The proof would speak louder, turning shadows to light. As the suits piled into a black sedan, tires crunching gravel in retreat, Paul and Jax slipped away, the night swallowing their path back to the garage. Dawn's first blush tinged the horizon as they arrived. Rita and Tom's return sinking like fate's timing. The dossier delivered, ripples already stirring in newsroom inboxes. But the scanner crackled anew, alerts for the club's outpost, a routine inspection, masking deeper intent. The crew reunited, faces etched with the night's toll, coffee steaming as plans evolved. Paul's mind raced to Samuel, the spark he'd kindled now ablaze against corruption's chill. This was the precipice, redemption's edge, where promises faced their fiercest trial, loyalty the only chain strong enough to hold. The river flowed on, witness to the unfolding moral odyssey as iron promise braced for the dawn's demands. Not thunder, but the quiet thunder of truth breaking free. Dawn crested the river like a vow fulfilled, its golden light spilling across the garage's open bay, chasing away the night's clinging shadows. The air hummed with fresh possibility, carrying the crisp bite of morning dew mixed with the faint metallic tang of the water's edge. Paul's Harley stood ready, engine ticking cool in the quiet, while the crew gathered one last time around the workbench. The ledger's secrets now digitized and dispatched, Rita's anonymous drop rippling through secure channels to journalists who'd long hungered for such cracks in the facade. Coffee steamed in chipped mugs, the aroma grounding them as the scanner's static whispered updates, early news feeds buzzing with breaking developments on city corruption. The Harlan name surfacing like debris in a cleared stream. Paul leaned against a tool cart, his silver-streaked hair catching the light, the weight of the hours etching deeper lines around his eyes. The night scout had confirmed the syndicate's scramble, suits scattering like rats from a sinking barge, their threats dissolving into frantic calls, intercepted on the airwaves. No raids, no fires. The truth had rolled in like a convoy at first light, exposing the bribes, the rigged permits, the vendetta that had festered since Mikey's stand. Outreach centers breathed easier now, their funding threads untangled, havens like the gymnasium secured against the developer's grasp. Jax clapped a hand on Paul's shoulder, the impact solid as forged iron, his squint easing into a rare, full smile. "Words out, Anchor. Clean ride all the way." Rita folded her tablet with a satisfied nod, her nurse's hands folding away the last files, the screen's glow fading like a mission complete. "Press is running it lead, anonymous source, but the dots connect. Council's calling emergency sessions, the sun's already lawyered up, but the rot's laid bare." Tom paced to the door, his broad frame silhouetted against the rising sun, the river sparkling below as if cleansed by the night's trials. Stations standing down on those inspections. Arson teams got warrants for the warehouse hits. We held the line, quiet like always. The crew's circle tightened, nods passing like silent oaths renewed, the garage's warmth wrapping them in the quiet victory of integrity over impulse. But Paul's thoughts drifted beyond the win, pulled back to the boy whose question had set this chain in motion. Samuel's wide eyes, the fragile spark amid grief. now mirrored in the dawn's promise, a heaven not of clouds or chrome, but of kept words echoing through generations. He stepped outside, the gravel crunching under his boots, the cool breeze ruffling his kuta as he gazed toward the suburbs where the outreach event had unfolded. The ride had come full circle, Mikey's buried vow unearthed, redeemed not in vengeance, but in shielding the vulnerable from shadows that preyed on loss. The syndicate's fall wasn't thunderous, it was poetic justice, a moral tide turning through ledgers and loyalty, proving that honor outlasted corruption's grasp. Jax joined him, lighting a cigarette with a flick of his Zippo, the flame's brief flare illuminating the lines of their shared history. "Kid's dad would be proud," he rumbled, exhaling smoke that curled toward the sky like a released breath. "Rode hard, kept his crew whole." "Just like us." Paul nodded, the anchor within settling at last, the pull of old ghosts easing into peace. They'd contacted Samuel's grandmother that morning, a quiet call from the garage phone, Paul's voice steady as he shared the tale's end, not in details, but in essence. The roads cleared, the lights protected, a legacy carried forward. The boy's response, relayed through tears in her voice, had been simple. "Tell Anchor. Heaven's got good company now." The crew mounted up as the sun climbed higher, engines roaring to life in a harmonious chorus that vibrated through the lot, scattering dew from the bikes like confetti from a hard-won parade. Rita and Tom led the flank, their machines gleaming under the light, while Jax fell in beside Paul, the convoy forming an unbreakable line toward the open road. No destination pressed today, just the ride itself, miles of blacktop unrolling like chapters yet to be written, the wind rushing past with the scent of pine and freedom. Paul's grip tightened on the handlebars, the leather warm under his palms as the garage receded in the mirrors, a bastion of chosen family, standing firm against the world's cynic pull. They carved through the morning haze, suburbs giving way to rolling hills where wildflowers nodded in the breeze, the river's path paralleling their own like a faithful shadow. Stories would spread from this, whispers in clubhouses and fire stations, tales of quiet courage that bound veterans, riders, healers into an extended kin. Samuel's question lingered in the throttle's hum, a reminder that redemption wasn't a single stop, but the endless horizon where promises met the dawn. Paul's face softened in the wind's caress, scars fading in the light, the boy's light now woven into his own, a living inheritance passed from one scarred soul to the next. As the convoy crested a rise, the world sprawling vast and forgiving below, Paul felt the final piece slot into place. Heaven was indeed where bikers went, not on ethereal highways, but in the hearts they anchored, the oaths that outrode time. The engines sang on, carrying iron promise into the day, their bond a chain no shadow could break. Thank you for riding with us on this journey of promises and the open road. If these tales of honor, loyalty, and quiet redemption resonate with your soul, hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Promise family. We'll throttle up for more stories together.